Hello there, all. Welcome to Literary as Feck with me, Clive Davis, and my good pal over there. What's your name, sir?
Nicholas O'Shea Khan.
You almost forgot, didn't you?
Yes, I did, yes.
It's been a busy week for Nick.
It has, yes.
So he hasn't even finished the second book we're talking about.
No, not only that, but after having put it off, I think maybe 9 episodes ago, I referred to this upcoming episode as the Phantom episode because we've been already putting it off for months at that point, and I still...
None of this you.
Oh, no, yeah, all down to me for not being able to finish it. But in my defense, this is a weighty tome, very readable, but just
yes.
it takes a while. Like you really have to give it your full attention. It's not something you can really slough off or half pay attention to. You kind of, at least I found I really needed to be present for this book.
Well, the reason I was surprised that it took you a while to read it is not so much because it is a big book, so I understand that. It's just that I took pleasure in it. The way I took pleasure in it was I found that I couldn't read it, even though it does lend itself, because it's diary entries, it does lend itself to being read piecemeal. But what I found was I really enjoyed totally losing myself in it for like an hour or two at the time. And then I wouldn't touch it again for a few days and then took it out again rather than bit by bit. So I didn't have a problem consuming it, just because I was consuming it in huge chunks when I did sit down for it, because I found that was the way, that's how I enjoyed it anyway, was just to get, just lost in it really. Which is
but
great
it
for
still
the
takes a lot
experience.
It takes like an hour's reading though. I would be like, I haven't done as much of this as I feel like like in a normal book, I would have felt like I would have killed a lot more of the book in an hour.
Right.
And I would get to the end of an hour and be like, I feel like I've only read 40 pages rather than like 150.
Yeah. Well, they're big pages, and there's a lot of footnotes, and but oddly enough, because it's so it makes for a great reading experience, but we'll see if it makes for a great talking about experience or not, because I just got lost in it, and then my wife would ask, what's that book about then? I don't know. What happened? I don't know. but the actual reading experience is did you enjoy this book first off?
Oh, absolutely. In a second I'm going to ask you to kind of give a little background and how you even heard about it, because I'd never heard of this book before, but I will say this, I feel like, and not just because of its length and the density, but it really makes you feel like you kind of did tag along for this 2-year trek through Africa and this kind of ethnic study.
To be honest, if people ask me now, have you ever been to Africa, I'm considering saying yes, I have. Actually.
Yes. I read Michel Leiris' Phantom Africa.
Right. Yes. So so I should probably describe a little bit about what this book is and who Michel Leiris is. So Michel Leiris was, I suppose, he started off life known for his, and ended it as well, I guess, overall, being known for his sort of autobiographical works, right? Frenchman who, started off, I guess, with the Surrealists, apparently was a fellow traveler of André Breton, until André Breton expelled him, apparently, whatever that means. He wasn't, and then he ended up writing this surrealist periodical, or writing for it, called Documents, with Georges Bataille, right? The kind of, I guess you'd call him a philosopher who wrote, I suppose he's most famous for Story of the Eye, right? Which is something I've never read, but I'm wondering if it might be future literary as feck material, maybe. I've always quite fancied to read Georges Bataille, but always wondered it might be one of those things that hasn't necessarily dated. Like it would have been the Scandale in Paris in its day or whatever, but now it's just, so when he was 29 years old in 1931, he was asked by the ethnographer, here we go, Marielle Greul. I'm going for.
That sounds good to me.
That's because we both don't understand.
Don't speak French.
Yeah, as long as you put a bit of a in there, it sounds vaguely authentic, right?
Yep.
To take part as officially the secretary, what's the archivist, I guess, secretary archivist for this expedition from West Africa all the way from Dakar in Senegal all the way across to, I guess, what was then French Somaliland, right, in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, that way. It took 2 years. And
referred to as the mission, which is interesting because it keeps, when you're reading it, it keeps connoting to me like a religious kind of a thing. But in this case, the mission seems to have been a mission of ethnographic exploration and stealing.
And theft.
A lot of stealing.
Basically. One of the interesting things about it, and as primarily there was 2 long stopovers. One was in the Dogon territory in Mali, and then another one, the Amhara, was somewhere in Ethiopia. That like they stop over for a long time. Yeah.
They seem to almost become embedded in the community for a fairly long time in that, and then it all goes sideways. That's a really interesting part, and that's kind of where I'm just about at the point where they're being chased out of or trying to escape from that.
Right. And it was eventually published in 1934 and is now being translated for the first time in its entirety, I believe, by this guy Brent Hayes Edward, with a bunch of footnotes and also like excerpts from letters that Michel LEIRIS was sending home for context, which actually brings a lot. It's quite interesting because he's quite self-accusatory, isn't he? Like he writes something and then he's like, I can't believe I wrote this shit, you know.
His wife gets quite worried about him, it seems like, at one point, because because he's also sending her back the journal entries too, and every now and again the journal entries are quite negative or quite, he gets he gets into very dark places.
We'll get into this because it's a fascinating mix of someone who is paying attention and is very sympathetic to the victims of colonialism, but also at the same time is a massively solipsistic man, right? Yeah. I tell you what fascinates me, an interesting bit of trivia before we get on to it. I don't know if you read this. Do you know who was originally asked to have the position of secretary archivist, or certainly was asked to go along?
Michael Palin. I'm assuming Michael Palin.
No, because I believe Michael Palin
was not born yet. Okay.
No, Louis Buñuel. Can you imagine the book we would have ended up with if?
Pretty good too.
Absolutely. I would love that. That sounds like a real missed opportunity, right? The Louis Buñuel
Phantom Africa
memoir. Yeah, that sounds.
Actually, we should say this before we even get into this. I found myself, and then I haven't looked into it at all, but I kept thinking every now and again he would refer to like, oh yeah, and then we shot all of this film of this or that, and I'm constantly like, ooh, where's that? Is that film?
Yeah. I looked up Michel LEIRIS on the IMDb because I had a feeling as well maybe there might have been something based on his later writings, or because he's most famous for the L'Âge d'Homme or Manhood series, but I don't think so. I don't think there is anything. So it's certainly not extant, or they haven't. It might be in an archive somewhere, I don't know, but they haven't turned it into like a.
Okay, but it's funny because obviously the mission had a film side as well as a photography. I mean, we do see some of the photographs. The book does reproduce some of the pictures taken.
Yes,
which are
barely,
great.
Right? They're quite.
The quality's not great, but they're there. But I definitely wondered about, because some of the ceremonies that they witnessed, or
yes,
we'll talk about that as we get into it too. Like how many of these ceremonies were performed just because they were there.
Right, including one of my favorite, because this I discovered the original robot monster.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but think,
Will.
As we get into the latter part of the book too, I couldn't help but think about, like, because not that long ago we watched Screaming Jay Hawkins in that movie based on the different book. Yeah, and I couldn't help but constantly see him in these descriptions of these like ceremonies. I kept seeing like Screaming Jay Hawkins stumbling around in the background in my mind.
Right. Yeah, so no, it's an interesting point though. Like, I remember when me and the wife were trekking across Papua New Guinea, the locals would occasionally
in your pith helmets.
Yeah, would occasionally come out and do these kind of dances for us, or recreate famous battles, that they'd fought with rival tribes. And yeah, it was a part of it. I mean, this is awesome, but also on the other hand, like, yeah, would you normally be doing this, like, if we weren't here, like, on a date? Would you be jumping up and down, or are you just kind of playing it up for us? Although we did go to a genuine Papuan funeral. I think that was genuine because there was a real dead body on a funeral pyre made from banana leaves. Yeah, pretty sure that I don't think they murdered one of the for our entertainment. Yeah. Anyway, we digress. Yes. Yes, Michel LEIRIS tells us pretty much everything you'd want to know about this expedition, and of course about his wet dreams and
masturbation.
Yes, and yeah, it's a fascinating. I mean, I don't know where to start with this one, really. Any thoughts, Nick?
Well, maybe I'll just flip it, because I mean, I've unlike all the things we've read up until now, I actually marked this kind of quite a bit. I mean, even to the very beginning, like, I was fascinated just by the description of the trip on the ship to get to Africa from France. Like, just, right away you're in the hands of like somebody who is giving it to you warts and all, and therefore it's almost like I mean, not quite the book about going to Africa that Charles Bukowski might have written, but like there's something very real and very well observed about the characters, but yeah. So I mean, I just at a certain point I just started to mark places that I either laughed out loud or it caused me to ponder the nature of colonialism or some bigger issue. But I think the first thing I noticed or noted is this. As we are about to go, I shake out the sheet that one of the locals lent us to use as a tablecloth the night before. It had seemed so white that we were upset at having slightly stained it with red wine. But now I find some dried shit on the other side.
Yeah, there's a lot of fantastic asides like this. And also a lot of what's really interesting about it's interesting, there's this mix of because he's so solipsistic, and also he's so critical of this of the colonial kind of experiment in general, but also is clearly kind of a part of it, right? And even though he is, I wonder actually, apparently the expedition leader Marcel Créole wasn't best pleased with the end result. Yeah, and I can kind of understand because even though he is complicit, there's no doubt to a certain extent, it is kind of admirable that he doesn't gloss over things like Griol went to a temple last night, and when no one was looking, he slipped some sacred relics into his boot.
like razored out paintings and like rolled them up.
Yeah, remarkable. Yeah, and some of them to this day are on display in
France.
Yeah.
I was surprised and impressed, I guess, and horrified by how honest LEIRIS is about just the kind of, at a certain point, like, he kind of talks about like it becomes kind of dispiriting to him how much of their job really is just constantly kind of buying and kind of like trying to it's very much a kind of a mercenary side to what they're doing.
and I suppose just to give the devil his due, I suppose some people would argue, I mean, some of those relics, for example, even though they're not theirs to take, you do wonder that if they weren't taken
would
and preserved,
they survive?
would they still be there, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's, yes, yeah, the swings and roundabouts, dangerous territory to get into. But yeah, and he's, what's really interesting as well, the other thing I found fascinating about LEIRIS is kind of, so he refers to Joseph Conrad a lot as well, which I guess is significant in relation to Heart of Darkness, right? But this seems to be a very, it's like a more, I don't know, grounded, realistic version of that in a way. So it's like, it is, yes, it is more, it's all about a journey into himself. In a way, the journey is a journey into his own, you know, I suppose Conrad would have it as, yeah, the Heart of Darkness. But in reality, it's more a heart of just kind of general ennui. Like he wants to
That's
escape.
Very French.
Yeah,
very French.
Yeah, oh yeah. He wants to escape civilization, and he keeps talking about every time he comes across some Europeans, he's like, these Europeans, they are so boring. I hate them. I want to see the real Africa. But then he brings it with himself, right? He takes it everywhere he goes.
Yes.
And when you know the Africans don't live, you know, aren't kind of quote unquote like savage enough for his to live up his ideal of what you know it should be, then he's disappointed, right? Like so it's interesting, but the reason I think he gets away, the reason that it's not necessarily offensive is that he's so honest. Like, I feel he is genuinely telling us what he thinks. And also, it's not as if he's not without self-critique as well, because that goes along with the solipsism. It's a kind of bound up, right? So
yeah. I mean, at one point, as the book goes on, he keeps referring to himself as a masochist, and you can sort of see that. You can see this kind of self-loathing more than anything else that just kind of starts to bleed through the pages at a certain point. And part of it is in relation to the fact that he is the white man in Africa who can't ever really connect with the people because, you know, there's just this wall of whatever it is of history and culture and racism and colonialism between him and them, but also just because he hates himself, because you feel like he wouldn't be comfortable anywhere.
Yes,
you could drop him off in any room full of people and he would be the guy sitting in the corner like Robert Crumb, like, you know, just like sweating and being uncomfortable and unhappy.
Right. Yeah. He's particularly fascinated as well, isn't he, with I guess you'd call it possession cults.
Yes, that the second half of the book where they really get into this in Ethiopia, where there's this kind of like these multiple personalities or multiple, what I don't know what you call them, but multiple genies almost that seem to take over these women mostly.
And and like shamans or something like that, and he falls for one as well, right? Or it falls in lust at least with MOI-ish. It's kind of again an interesting example of someone not keeping the kind of required distance between subject and person recording it.
And that way, you know what, I thought multiple times as I read this reminds me of like, not as over the top, but almost a form of like protogonzo journalism, like
right
Hunter S. Thompson like embedding himself in the Hells Angels or whatever, but like him embedding himself in this mission and then writing exactly what he thinks and exactly what he sees, you know, without any gloss, and what also highly subjective, like no attempt to say this is an objective you know, version of reality. This is entirely it refracted through my lenses.
Right. Also as well, it's quite interesting to me that the thought that I just had has just gone straight out of my head. That's very interesting. With what the fuck was I going to say? It was just
Here's another one. It's just like, you know, quite early on in the book, but they're at some sort of
middle age strikes again.
Yes, yeah. It's a part where a guy sticks a knife in his head. A guy that they're watching thrusts it 2.5 centimeters into his head without any possibility of deception. He keeps the knife embedded there for about 15 minutes, during which time he sings and makes all sorts of jokes. He presents his skull, thus adorned, to several people in accordance. Grial, however you say his name, Grial, Mouche, Luton, and I, amongst others, and advises us to try to take the knife out by shaking it vigorously. We comply, but without success. The man who finally extracts the knife takes it with both hands and pulls it with all his strength. Like, what?
Yeah, there's a lot of moments.
Here?
There's a lot of these magical moments, right? Like where you kind of got to handle it, and it's the day-to-day grind of travel, and then there's something. During the night, a man came and threw a goat into our tent, and then what's that now? Like just these random bursts of strangeness happen, and you don't know if it's just that he doesn't have the wider context for them, or none of these are just random strange things that happened.
I mean, it's hard to know, because I do think to some degree, especially later on when they're in Ethiopia, it does feel like they're in a community where a lot of stuff goes down, where people do get into fights and people do get drunk, and people, like any community, right? Some of the stuff is just like, oh yeah, people being people in slightly scary ways.
Yeah, and like if you dropped an Ethiopian off, in a small town in the UK in the mid-30s, and they witnessed like a bar fight over something, they'd probably think, these people are fucking crazy. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. It's interesting too, in various points particularly when they get into places where white people maybe at this point haven't been as often, like that the children will just like flee in terror. And you wonder if that's
understandably so. The thieves are back. The thieves and killers are back.
That did make me wonder, because of the legacy of slavery and other things, if that's a piece of it, or if it's just it's that kind of almost abject thing where like that something's wrong with that guy. Why are his eyes blue? Like you kind of look like a zombie or something, I suppose. If the kid's never seen you. In the same way, even when I lived in Japan, every now and again, particularly with small children, there'd be moments where one would look at me like, that's not right. Like, what am I seeing?
Actually, just yesterday, I was in front of returning to my apartment building. There was a little fat kid sat in front of the building, and he goes, "Konnichiwa," and I said, "Konnichiwa, sayonara," and he walked out. I said, "Sayonara, bye bye." And then just as I was going around, I could hear him exclaim loudly to himself, "Was that the foreigner?" Like, I wasn't quite sure.
That's awesome.
It was interesting. But the other thing as well is like
that, you know what, I could totally see that if I had been a kid in Wicklow, if there had been a Japanese man who just happened to wander by 111 Wicklow Heights when I was like 4 or 5, that would have been exactly my response as well.
Oh yeah. If one had been walking around my, in my village when I was 8, 9 or 10, I would probably have accosted him and asked him, "Have you ever been to Monster Island?" Like,
right.
And can you go and visit that kind of thing? But but he's really good at painting little pictures as well. There's there's one towards the end of the book where they end up at a salt mine in Ethiopia, and they walk in and there's a man like kind of doing something with some kind of hoe or machete or something. Yeah, and he's so alarmed that this white man who suddenly turned up, he like literally like freezes into place like this, and then just kind of walks slowly backwards when they bring their camera out, because he's so terrified of what they might be doing. But it's just nicely observed, and he even says, "We thought we were dreaming." Like, he's quite good at painting these little kind of nuggets of everyday surrealism, which you can encounter anywhere. They just happen to be on the African continent in this case. Like, what I mean is, he's good at, I don't think he does now and again, but he doesn't necessarily, like you said, to his point, he would be an outsider anywhere. So, and I think that's the other reason the book doesn't come across as offensive, is because his othering of people feels as if this is something he does everywhere.
Everyone he meets.
And then when he turns up in a community full of, you know, these colonial expat types, he does the same thing with them. He talks about their bulbous noses and, you know, like, so it's not, you know, it doesn't feel, it's not this punching down thing.
No,
it's a man who's not comfortable in his skin or anywhere else. So in that regard, it's kind of, it seems weirdly more legit than if you'd have sent someone more level-headed who would have recorded it for posterity. There we go. Prosperity. Yes, prosperity.
Posterity.
Ah, posterity.
Prosperity is having money.
There we go. Posterity. There we go.
Yeah.
So anyway, for someone who would have recorded it on their prostate, this is more. This is almost more valuable in a way, I think, now in the long run, to have this.
There's you know, I mean, this is just occasionally I would just mark a piece of great writing, because I mean he is a poet too, right? I mean that was he talks a little bit about having, you know, having been a poet before he came on the thing, but you know, I also take up some darning and find in my pack that my family provided me with some magnificent best Whitechapel needles from Woodfield and Sons, long as daggers and with eyes as wide as the gash of a London prostitute after Jack the Ripper has been at her. This just comes up in the middle of a thing about him sewing something and it's like tent, you know, like
no, his mind is often in the gutter, which is something I could appreciate.
You know, it's the other thing. I mean, again, this is just, you know, it's very, it really deals with the abject. It really deals with, like, I'm constantly, like, my toes were itchy a lot of the time while reading this, about like descriptions of little things burrowing their way into your flesh, and just just the amount of insect life and the amount of disease, you know, which again, you know, it's Africa's unfortunately kind of well known.
Fascinate me actually, because I've always had, like, they seem like something you would be able to avoid, but like, so because you'd have to stand barefoot in place for a while, right, for a chigga to get in. I would have.
I don't know. I mean, like ticks, for example, right? Because ticks are, you know, they will, they'll get onto your body and then they'll roam around looking for a place to embed. So you can have them on your body for hours and hours before they do that. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I hope I've never had one. I don't think I've ever had one. What even are they?
They just kind of burrow in. You know,
they're an insect of some kind, I assume.
Yeah, they kind of, they just live there. They just live at the sole of your feet, and you have to kind of. I don't think they do anything bad to you necessarily.
A head louse for the foot, I guess.
Yeah, but they embody themselves, and they kind of, I guess, they move around, and they're quite hard. It's like having a stone in your foot or something.
Ooh, good God.
But the other thing is quite fascinating as well, is his kind of his quest for authenticity is kind of an amusing kind of act of futility as well. Like he'll go to this amazing ceremony where someone goes into some kind of trance and it just sounds incredible, like nothing you've ever seen before. And then the next day, you know, someone tips him, you know, there's a sign that wasn't a real authentic, because, you know, she didn't say the blessing before they cut the chicken's head off or something like that, and he's like, "Oh God damn it, gypped again!" You know, like. So he's always on this kind of, you know, he's always slightly thinking he might have been, you know, they might have went over on him, and they're keeping the real African magic to themselves or something, you know. And while you're reading it, you're thinking, why would they do that? Like, I'm not quite sure what the MO for them doing that would be, you know.
Although earlier in the book you do get the, I mean, again, whether it's just their paranoia or whatever, but you do occasionally get the feeling that they are sort of being led away from, like, there's one where some guys take them on a kind of a wild goose chase and seemingly won't take them to the cave they want to go to, maybe because they are a sacred space, and maybe because they've quite rightly gotten the feeling that these guys are going to steal anything that's not nailed down.
The last time we took these fucking pale faces somewhere, they ripped off the joint.
Exactly. So, you know, another thing that's interesting too is, like, in nowadays, I guess, right, there's a lot less moral relativism to some degree around things like some of the circumcision stuff, you know, particularly the female circumcision, but also even some of the male circumcision stuff that's described is kind of like, at one point they, like, this part is so carried out according to a Wolof custom, with the penis laid on a barrel and a cold chisel placed on it at the correct spot to receive the hammer's blow.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, okay. Yeah, and you know, so I it's interesting because they don't seem to take any. There's no moralizing about this at all. There's nothing. There's no like, maybe this is not okay to do.
To
kids and to do to women. You know, to kind of disfigure them in this way. That's very specifically around denying. In the case of females, are denying pleasure, right? But it does seem like clearly at this point they're just like, nope, this is cultural, and this is
right, which is refreshing about that in this day and age, like you said. And the moral relativism brings us around in a way to the, like we mentioned, the whole thing about the theft. Well, on the one hand, they are thieves and it's not theirs, but on the other hand, and it reminded me again when we were in Papua. Was it when we were in Papua? Yes, me and the wife.
So you and your wife went around stealing anything that wasn't nailed down.
No. But I considered it at one point when we were taking to this village, and they brought out a mummy for us to see. They brought out the mummy of a, the kind of the king of the village or whatever, the founder of this kind of holy man. They brought out a mummy, and it was quite interesting. It was, I'm not quite sure. I'm guessing it must have been preserved in the way that those, I think, similar to those Japanese monks that would go into a cave and slowly starve themselves and just kind of desiccated. And they brought out this wizened old, I can't really do this justice on camera, can I? Like, just kind of hunched up with his knees like this. And it was a genuine, someone who had just mummified and had shrunk. And they brought it out for us to see. And they brought out this mummy. But there was like holes in it where mice had eaten into it. Yes, and I was like, dude, look after your mummy.
Your mummy.
You know, or some European might come and steal it and put it in a museum.
That's interesting. But you know, this is what's fascinating to me. And you know, I think in this way, you know, and the book that we're going to talk about in the next episode as well, they both kind of touch on things that, so, you know, a lot of the history that I understand, or the history that I know of the Celtic people, is written by the Romans. So it's hard to know what, like, to take it with a pinch of salt. But you know, when you read about the Celts and the spiking their hair up with lime and shit and painting themselves blue with woad and running into battle naked and all, you know, it's very tribal. It sounds very much like what I picture, you know, what I've read about indigenous people all over the world. But then I think to like my own childhood, right? So there's this church in Ireland. I don't remember which town it's in, but in it there is the decapitated head of Saint Oliver Plunkett, who was, I believe, burned alive. And I should probably have Googled this before I told this. But in any case, as a kid, I went into a church with a beautiful glass, ornate, kind of metal-worked box thing with a human head in it that people would pray to. And what's the difference? You know, who are the cannibals?
I wonder who the real cannibals are.
Yes, yeah. Pipe.
It could be worse. They could have. Wow. Watch this for a very bad gag shoehorned in. They could have had his human head in a glass jar, suspended on plastic straws, which you slowly took out one by one until it fell, and that would be Oliver Plunkett. Hey!
Okay, I'll draw that as a comic. When I get back to drawing comics, that'll be the first one I do.
Oliver Plunkett.
So, okay. Here's another one. This is, again, I also like the fact that every now and again he does that thing.
I just wanted to apologize for the Oliver Plunkett joke. I just realized that was rubbish. That was really terrible.
And to any fervent Catholics or fans of the game Kerplunk.
But I am looking forward to the comic.
But he also does this thing that I love about, and when we did many years ago, when we talked about that huge book about the wizard we did with Darren.
Oh, right. The Aleister Crowley book.
The Aleister Crowley book, yeah. Where I was fascinated because I think I made a reference back to how I liked also reading old Roman histories where they would just introduce things that were clearly bollocks, like made up magical stuff alongside things that seemed like historically accurate, right?
Yes.
So every now and again, he will report something that somebody else has said almost as fact, and you're like, hang on, what? And this was one of these sections I really liked. More tales from Mamadou Vad. The great fight between the monkey and the dog, the marabout who entered an elephant's behind while it was asleep, inadvertently stepped on its heart while leaving, and then found himself stuck after a contraction of the sphincter. Which may just be a story, but it's a great story. I don't know why I don't already know the story of the guy who walked into an elephant's ass, stepped on its heart, and got trapped when its ass contracted.
You'd have heard, right? It would have got around.
That's a great children's story. There should have been a Ladybird book of that for sure in my school library. Well, the book is full of this. I mean, like if it's almost every 2 or 3 pages, you'll find some nugget of something utterly.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing there's a page here, so there's a spread. There's a list. He just writes this list at one point, and I'm gonna read this because this is quite fascinating to me. Because it just sends you down about a dozen rabbit holes at the same time, right? It's just I guess he's bored or he doesn't have anything to do in particular, so he makes a list of African imagery, right? Which reads. Meyerbeer's Opera L'Africaine, which its famous unison section and Vasco da Gama's great aria, Father Bugod's Cap and Abd el Kadar's Smala, Aida, composed by Verdi for the opening of the Suez Canal, The Legend of Prester John, The Death of Livingston, Fashoda, Arthur Rimbaud selling arms to Menelik, Savorang de Braza, The Imperial Prince killed by the Zulus, The Voulez Chanois massacres, The Dynamiters Gaud and Toket, the Ngoko Sanga affair, the Tiez Kai scandal, the Congo Ocean, the Battle of the Pyramids, the Agadir affair, the Algeciras Conference, Raymond Roussel's Impression d'Afrique, Queen Ranavolo, the Amazons of Behanzin, and Sirda Kitchener and the Mahdi War and Samori, etc. And I'm thinking, what's all that? That all sounds fascinating. And that's just like one page is sent you scurrying down all these. And I've bookmarked it, and I will be running down all these leads. And I don't know how many of them will actually lead, or some of them will turn out to be something he made up in a brain fever.
Right. On quinine. There's one of the things that's interesting is every now and again, you'll get the feeling and he'll be clear about it, or he'll, and then he seems like to forget, because I mean, that's the nature of humans, is like to have an epiphany and then 2 days later to completely forget what the epiphany was that you had.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah. But there's a part here where they're trying to interview an old lady about some of this magical stuff quite early in the book, and she smiles maliciously, parries all my questions, and transforms everything into utterly harmless facts. It's almost as though she's recounting how she had been ill and when healed had herself become a healer. I discover over the course of the afternoon that the reason she's unwilling to say more is that the woman who preceded her as head of this sect was arrested 15 years ago by the French authorities, beaten, imprisoned, and exiled in Cadi, where she died in horrible misery, all because the tom-toms of the whatever water drum were a pretext for debauchery. So basically, he is aware that there's a brutal history of colonialism here, that some of the people are like, I don't want to tell you anything about our culture because we have no idea what you'll do with that information, whether or not we're going to get,
Right.
And then again, because there's also Christian missionaries, they do at some points in the book bump into people there on Christian missionary work as well, and that is a whole other.
Well, he's always pinballing between kind of being bored by other Europeans that he meets, or being frustrated that he can't properly communicate with local people, right? Like he's very rarely happy unless he's lusting after MOA-ish or something like that.
Right. Which is great that he wrote all of that stuff and sent it back to his wife. Like that's
right.
you wonder about that.
But then on the one hand, when he seemed like, yeah, but then he says like really unforgivable things about, you know, some, it would be like making love to cattle or something like that.
Yes, yeah. There's, yes. But that's, he does this whole, that's that whole bit about where he's like, well, because everyone's nude all of the time in this, wherever he was at the time, it's like, therefore all the mystery's gone. Like the whole, it's almost like the like European women are beautiful because they're ashamed in some way, or you know, they cover right.
Yeah, which I don't know what that says about me, is good or bad, but I know what he means.
But I could go on for days. I mean, I've just barely touched the first few of these notes, so I won't. But one thing that's interesting to me is when they sort of get into trouble, like in near the back half of the book. That was really palpable to me, that feeling of like, and maybe it's because I've been an expat twice over, but that feeling of like,
and you were run out of town the last time as well, don't forget.
I was, yes,
hard and feathered.
Yes, yeah. It's that fear that you have as an outsider of not quite knowing if you're reading the cues right, or not quite being 100% sure if the political prevailing winds are maybe starting to blow in another way, and you might be the last person in the know.
Right.
And you know, that even during the earthquake, I remember feeling like, do I fully get the nuance of what I'm being told in the news, or do I fully, like when I go shopping and people are, I remember like lining up and just buying this grill thing because like people were like panic buying them. I was like, I guess I need that too, and then got it home. I was like, I didn't realize I had no gas canisters to work, and I was like, oh well, that was a waste of money. But
that is somewhat to do with you being a panicky hypochondriac as well.
That is true, yes. But other people were panicking as well, and they were panicking with knowledge. I was panicking with an absence of knowledge.
Panicking with knowledge. I like this. That's like, just because you're not just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, that whole part of the book seemed really like I got, and also just the pain in the ass of dealing with bureaucracy. There's a lot of that in the Ethiopian section as well, of like having to get things rubber stamped and go back and forth, and everyone's dragging their heels. And I was like, yeah, this feels really real to me in a very kind of,
and that's purely from the European side of things, right? Like
sure.
On the other end, the trouble he has with it is not so much the bureaucracy; it's more to do with just things taking as long as, it's like the opposite of that, right? Where the bureaucracy makes sure that the things kind of get done on time, whereas the local kind of way of dealing with time is, well, you know, it takes as long as it takes to get from here to there, and if I get waylaid on the way and get married and have 5 children, so it slows my journey down by a decade, that's just the way it was meant to be, you know. Which he finds infuriating, but at the same time, you know, clearly, he's rallying, like we said, he's rallying against everything, right? Like he's not comfortable anywhere. But so the interesting thing, speaking towards the end of the book as well, another thing that's quite interesting that kind of rears its head quite, you've totally forgotten about it, and then it rears its head quite organically, is, so he's returning to Europe in 1933.
Yes.
And he just mentions something about this Hitler fella, you know, and he's leaving Ethiopia as well, right? So you're thinking, well, it's only a couple of years later, I'm thinking about the atrocities that Mussolini's...
Well, they're already there. I mean, like the fascists are already in Italy.
Yes, but they're not quite...
Sorry, in Ethiopia.
They're not quite kicking off yet, right? They haven't... Yes. But you're thinking, oh, yeah, I mean, a few years down the line, I mean, wow, there's a whole world of shit about to descend upon this place via Mussolini, right?
Yeah. And that's quite sad. You think about, because in a way, World War I even comes up, because some of the theaters of World War I were in Africa, and then you realize that, yes, some of the theaters of war in World War II, and it's like, what does that have to do with these people and their culture and their way of life, that they get dragged into this mess, you know, this European mess? But it's because Europe's there, right?
Right. So another thing I found quite interesting as well, in terms of another future contender for LAF is so apparently this inspired this journey, and particularly Michel LEIRIS' journal, inspired a book from 1954 called The Radiance of the King, which was written by a Guinean writer called Kamara Lay.
Okay.
It's been reprinted recently by the New York Review of Book Classics, and this apparently is a very highly regarded book, which sounds like it might be right up our alley as well. So yeah,
definitely add that to the list. Yeah. And we sorry, before we actually talked about this on air, we were talking, and then that Haile Selassie shows up. Who's an interesting historical figure to have appear, because I wasn't sure when the name first came up if this was the same one that I had heard of. Have you where have you gone? Clive has exited the building for some reason. So I'm just going to flip through my copy of the book and see if I can find something else exciting. Oh no,
sorry,
it's back.
Cat rescuing business.
Ah, I see. What happened to your cat there?
That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm prepared to say.
All right, sure.
Highly you were talking about.
Yeah. Sorry, yes. I did mention yeah. So you said you maybe know
smooth bit of podcast in there from us.
Oh yes.
I'm not going to podcast it, so you just
no, it's even better because when you leave, you're just gone. We just get your map there.
And my fez as well, don't forget.
I didn't even realize that's what that was. That's awesome.
Yeah, carry on.
Did you buy that? Did you get that especially for this episode?
No, I got a fez because originally I was gonna, for a short film I was making, I was looking for something to turn into a flying guillotine, but this is too small.
Oh, okay. I flying guillotine fez.
Just like that.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, please don't die of a heart attack on air. I watched that live as a kid.
Anyway, we really are straying all over the map.
Yes, now. Yeah. So here's just some of it. Like, as I said, it's so amazing. This huge book about Africa, but occasionally he'll stop because it is still a diary to tell us things like various things are becoming clearer to me. A great deal of my neurosis has to do with my habit of never fully completing the act of coitus due to exacerbated Malthusianism, which apparently is the fear of like being a parent or adding to the world's problems by fathering children. So I guess he was
when I first read that, I read it wrong. I thought he said Methylusianism. I thought, what, a fear of being raised from the dead, or
right? And then, so yeah, then a couple of pages later, it would surely be better to strut around like a hardy brute who shoots his load now and again, either for amusement or for hygiene's sake.
Yeah. There's a bit as well towards the end when he's not looking forward to coming home to. I'm paraphrasing. I haven't got it, but he's not looking forward to going back to France, but he's looking forward to go back to his wife, right? The Zen.
Yes, yeah.
Right?
2 years.
Yeah.
Living
and
in
tents. He starts the sentence out of like, and then he just descends it to be honest, and he's like, yes, not so much to see her, but to see Zeddy, to spend time with her, to to enjoy her, and to fuck her. He just to be honest. Because the interesting thing is, as much as he does fall for MOI-ish, and I don't know how much of a chance he'd have anyway. Within the context of her standing in the community, I suppose he would be punching way above his weight. But you get the feeling that even if he had the chance, like, he doesn't quite get over this weird racial divide, right?
Yeah,
like he's not quite like he'd rather abstain than cross the color line, as they used to say. Right? Like he's not quite prepared to go that far, right?
Yes,
which is also kind of it's again that moral relativism, I suppose you could refer to it as, is like even someone this kind of out there and you know, relatively open-minded and anti-colonialist, even that person isn't willing to even, you know, consider the possibility of actually, you know,
the 1930s, right? So
what they consider like another species or something almost, right? So yeah, it's, I mean, and it's but again that brings us around to how extraordinary that this book is, more than anything else. Not as anywhere near as offensive as you might expect it to be, right?
Right, because it has that self-reflexivity, and he's constantly, I mean, it's said because he seems to loathe people, you know, there's a kind of a misanthropy more than anything else, more than us,
right.
And then, you know,
although that's not to excuse, you know, there clearly is a strain of
I mean,
in it.
But I guess maybe because he's aware, I mean, I don't know how aware he is of his own racism, although he seems marginally aware of it. But you know, there's a great part here where he says, Europeans always greatly enjoy talking about the Abyssinian anarchy. They like to wallow in it. Always underlying their talk is this leitmotif: everything will be better for this country, which will be the best of countries if only it were made into a colony. So there's like, you know, the immediate, like, Europeans and white people generally don't like to see self-governance in people who aren't white. It's always like, we could do it better for you. We could organize your lives. We could run you better than you can run you. And that's kind of been the history of.
But also, I mean, we get off topic a little bit as well, but it comes kind of like a weird self-fulfilling prophecy where they almost make sure that that's the way it happens.
Oh yeah, because they go and wreck countries.
Well, also by kind of by overseeing, you know, right up until the point where some kind of, there's no other option than it's going to descend into some kind of civil war.
Yeah.
And then leave, and then step back and go, see, look what happens when we're not in charge.
Or in fact, or leveraging pre-existing racial, you know, issues within a country, like one group against another. I mean, like the various colonial powers were famous for that. And, you know,
well, that's the thing we're not considering as well, in terms of, you know, there's also the possibility that he would go, let's say, for instance, he would pass from, I don't know, Mali, he goes across to Ethiopia, and who knows, you know, maybe the people in Ethiopia, the local people in Ethiopia would say things like, those fucking Malians are a bunch of savages, you know. And it's so there's
people are people, and people are
them as
tribal,
African, right? Pretty much. Like, he doesn't make too much distinction.
No.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we are rambling somewhat and tying ourselves up in hoping that we haven't said anything foolish, which we probably have anyway, so, and no is, so it's fine. So yes, I guess until next time. Glass bottle, just like that. Nothing like ending a chat about a book about Africa, but doing a Tommy Cooper impression. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely.